Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. Muscular Christianity, where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to a brand new week of broadcasting here on Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name, congenial, convivial, and amiable. As always, the program is Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. I want to jump right into the Word of God. We're using a schedule you can find at pray.afa.net. Bookmark it, open it up every morning. You'll find a scripture passage for every day, which you can read in your own copy of the scriptures, and then you will find a prayer there that you can pray back to God. Now, we're in John chapter 7, verses 1 through 24, where Jesus goes to Jerusalem for a Passover feast. A lot of interesting things here that we can learn that shed light on what's going on in our culture today. Now, we're told in chapter 7, verse 1, Jesus would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. So notice there's a place for prudence. Jesus didn't charge at every windmill that was out there. He knew there were some times when the path of prudence, the path of wisdom, was to avoid confrontation unless it was necessary, perfectly willing to take a stand, but we don't always have to die on every hill. So Jesus said, look, it's too dangerous for me to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to stay behind. Now his brothers went, but before they went, they told him, leave here and go to Judea. His brothers, hated him so much, they were actually trying to get him killed. They were trying to shame him or guilt him into doing something stupid by accusing him of being a coward. Now, you probably know guys that have gotten into a lot of trouble by allowing somebody to goad them or dare them or manipulate them, and that way Jesus wouldn't let them do it. Now, down in verse 7, he went to the festival, but he went there privately. Later in the week, he would wind up showing himself in public. But here's what he said to his close followers. He said to them, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil. Now, that's the explanation for the hatred of Christianity that we find in our world. The hatred of Christ and the hatred of us who bear the name of Christ. You know, there are dark powers that are in charge of every major institution in our culture. It's a reversal of where things were just maybe 2 generations ago, an amazing shift. We've always had people that denied transcendent truth, but right now those people that deny transcendent truth for the first time, they are in charge of every major institution in our culture. They're in charge of education, they're running politics, they're running business, they're running the media, they're running in the entertainment industry, and in many ways they're even running the church. Now the reality is those who hate the truth will hate those who speak the truth, and they hate us. You know, we're going to talk to an Alliance Defending Freedom attorney, second hour. They've gotten banned from Amazon's charity option because Amazon believes falsely that ADF is a hate group. Now, ADF is not a hate group. All they do is point out that it is evil for governments and businesses to deprive Christians of their constitutionally protected and identified rights. That's enough for Amazon to hate them. Now, this, by the way, shows us how the world gets Christians to compromise. They say, look, it's easy for us to get along. Just agree with us that our works are not evil. Just agree with us that homosexuality is a healthy, normal alternative to heterosexuality. Agree with us that 2 people of the same sex can get married, and the world will leave you alone. They'll actually celebrate you, and they'll write about how open-minded you are as a Christian, get you on their websites and in their periodicals. Now, in about the middle of the feast, Jesus decides to go to the temple and begin teaching in public. And he says this, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. So Jesus says, look, you got a problem with my teaching. Your problem is with God, because I got everything I'm teaching from him. And then he explains why it is that people reject the truth, the gospel, the Word of God, and it is not intellectual. You know, we want to think that the problem that non-believers have today is primarily an intellectual one. If we can just get them enough apologetics, if they can get just enough evidence, enough argumentation, enough data, we can bring them around. But Jesus says quite decisively that their problem is not intellectual, it is moral. He says this in verse 17, if anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether my teaching is from God. So Jesus says the issue is self-will. It's not intellect. It is stubbornness, not intellect. If anyone is willing to submit himself, if he is willing to do the will of God, to do the things that God directs men to do, he will recognize instantaneously that the Bible is, in fact, the Word of God. Now, one last thing. There's one verse that is a response to the challenge we often hear that non-Christians, that Christians are not supposed to judge one another. That's the only verse that non-Christians know. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Used to be everybody knew John 3:16. Now everybody knows Matthew 7:1. Judge not, lest ye be judged. So the world falsely believes that Christians are never supposed to judge others, never supposed to challenge their decisions, their lifestyle choices, or their worldview. And that's one of the ways they get us to compromise, by the way. But Jesus says here quite clearly in verse 24 that Christians are supposed to judge. In fact, he commands us to judge. He just wants our judgment to be based on objective truth and not on a subjective emotion. So he says in verse 24, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. The word judge means to consider, to separate, to decide, to prefer, to evaluate, to make a decision. It means to judge that one thing is better than another. That's what judges do. Whether it's on American Idol or The Voice or America's Got Talent or Stupid Pet Tricks, it's the job of judges to make judgment about which performers are better than others. Now, we get our word optics from the word appearance here. So our judgment, Jesus says, is to be based not on what we see, but on what God sees. We are not to judge by man's standards, but by God's standards. We are to judge not on the way things look, but on the way things are. We're always going to have a tendency to make judgments based on superficial standards rather than the standards of God, to judge on appearance instead of on reality, and substance, to judge on the basis of personal preferences rather than abiding principles. So we are to judge according to God's compelling standards. Well, let's take a moment and go to prayer. Lord Jesus, the world hated you because you testified that what it does is evil. I pray for my family, for the listening audience of Focal Point, that we will accept the reality here that there will be times when those in the world will hate us for pointing out that what they do is evil. Help us to know when to speak up and confront and when to hold back, just as you did. You always knew when the time was right to step forward publicly and when the time was right to remain hidden in secret. May we learn from you your perfect sense of timing. And may there be nothing false in us, just as there was nothing false in you. In your name, amen.
Did you ever sit down to watch TV with your family only to turn it off because of bad language? TV Guardian is technology that mutes foul language in real time while you're watching television. TV Guardian was born out of the desire to watch a movie with the family without exposing children or adults to coarse or foul language existing in most of today's entertainment. The closed caption feature within all programming is used to look ahead, detect the offensive words, and mute them. Using simple level filters and subfilters, TV Guardian can be used to filter content for your family. Religious references in mainstream programming are often offensive, using God's name in cursing. So TV Guardian offers filtering for those as well. More information is available at tvguardian.com/dish. tvguardian.com/dish.
American Family Radio is grateful for the support of TV Guardian.
If the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Jeff Myers, president of Summit Ministries, which is one of the nation's premier biblical worldview development ministries for teens and young adults, called California Assembly Bill 2943 the most blatant chilling of free speech in America he's ever seen in his lifetime. The bill, which seeks to criminalize the conveyance of the biblical teaching on human sexuality, places Summit Ministries staff in legal jeopardy. Consequently, Summit has canceled the conferences it planned to hold in California, saying we cannot and will not bend God's truth to accommodate California.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner, or visit the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy, welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. We're happy to have you in the conversation. A lot happening over the weekend that we want to get to about what's taking place in Washington, D.C. with this travesty of a Robert Mueller investigation. We want to poke into that just a little bit because so much of what's out there is just completely bogus, and it's beginning to be exposed for what it is. I'm looking at a piece here by Andy McCarthy from National Review Online. And you know, I think a lot of Andy McCarthy. I think Thomas Sowell is the smartest person in the world. I think Andy McCarthy, when it comes to legal matters, is not far behind. So I like to read everything that he has written. And he exposes in his column today the way the FBI and the Department of Justice have been burying information that exonerates General Flynn. Remember, General Flynn was hounded into pleading guilty and resigning. And what the Department of Justice had done to get him to do that is they basically destroyed this man's life. He wound up having to sell his home, and he finally pled guilty to protect what was left of the family's assets. He wanted to protect his son because his son was an aide of his. He didn't want his son to get dragged through this sawmill, and so he resigned in order to protect his family. Now it turns out that what the FBI did and DOJ is it was a railroad job on General Flynn. And remember, General Flynn was the first domino to fall. He doesn't fall, maybe nobody else falls. Remember that first domino, when it goes, they're all going to go. Well, General Flynn was the first domino to fall. And what Andy McCarthy says now, we're beginning to see what they wanted to conceal, what they wanted to keep hidden from the American people. And he says what this reveals is that the Justice Department and the FBI cannot be trusted to decide what the public gets to learn about their decision making. You know, we used to think of the Department of Justice, FBI, that's how I thought about them before the Obama administration. They were above reproach. They were absolute integrity. They were the one agency of the federal government you could trust without question. The Department of Justice would just follow the law. FBI would just investigate crimes, get the guilty, put them in prison. That's the way we thought about them. And Andy McCarthy says we can no longer think about the FBI like that anymore. And he says what he found, and we'll explain how they got to this in a second, but what the FBI and the DOJ have been doing is they have been redacting stuff that would tend toward exonerating people like General Flynn. And their explanation for this lack of transparency, the redacted parts are these big sections that are just blacked out, where you have no idea what's underneath the blacked out sections. And what the DOJ and the FBI are trying to tell us is that they need to do this to protect national security, to protect vital intelligence, to protect investigative operations. But it turns out, we have discovered over the weekend, that they were concealing their own questionable judgments and their conflicting explanations for their actions and for their use of foreign intelligence and criminal investigative authorities to investigate Michael Flynn, and to cover up the fact that they explicitly stated their belief that Flynn did not lie in the FBI interview, for which Special Counsel Robert Mueller has since prosecuted him on false statement charges. Now, where this all comes from is a lengthy report released by the House Intelligence Committee and Chairman Devin Nunes, 253 pages. It's a report on Russia's interference in the 2016 election. Now, this report, 253 pages, was completed weeks ago, but it was withheld because they had to do battle. The committee had to do battle with the Justice Department and the FBI over information that they wanted to black out, that the FBI and the DOJ wanted to black out. And again, they claim we can't declassify this stuff. We can't release this stuff because it will damage investigations and national security. It turns out, no, it would not. So what we learned when this information was brought to light is that there was no investigative or national security reasons to conceal them. DOJ was just in a major CYA mode, trying to protect themselves from kind of scrutiny, and now that information has come out. The DOJ and the Bureau insisted that the sky would fall if Congress was forced to release an Intelligence Committee report on government abuse of foreign intelligence surveillance. To the contrary, what we learned is that the FBI and the DOJ had used the unverified Steele dossier to obtain surveillance warrants on at least one person tied to the Trump campaign. So they wanted to keep that information. It was an Intelligence Committee report. They wanted to keep it from coming to light, ostensibly on the grounds of national security, but the real reason is it revealed that they had used this unverified and salacious Steele dossier to get a FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. Now, there was another, and what happened is originally when this 253-page report came out, everything was redacted, page after page, line after line, redacted, redacted, redacted. They managed to get most of this material unredacted. There are still some redacted portions, but most of it is now unredacted so people can read it for themselves, and you can find it online. Now, one of the major things that came out in an unredacted portion now is that when that the FBI and the DOJ did not believe that General Flynn had lied to them, did not believe that for 1 minute. Even James Comey testified to this fact. This is the intriguing disclosure. Flynn pled guilty. That is, he pled guilty to keep his life from being absolutely destroyed by Robert Mueller and his gang of assassins, political assassins. He pled guilty even though, this unredacted report says, even though FBI agents did not detect any deception during Flynn's interview. Now, there's no elaboration on this point. There was no discussion of why Flynn was interrogated in the first place. There was no insight on deliberations within the FBI and the Justice Department about whether he had deceptive intent. There's no explanation of how he came to be charged later by Mueller's prosecutors, even though the trained investigators who observed Flynn's demeanor during the interview did not believe he had told a lie. So the more information you get about this investigation, and remember, as I mentioned, Flynn was the first domino to drop. They got him by pressuring him to plead guilty. He didn't plead guilty because he was guilty. He pled because we're just seeing from the FBI reports themselves that he wasn't. They didn't detect any deception in him. That's come out now, publicly verified. But he had to do it in his judgment to protect his son and to protect what was left of the family's resources. So anyway, this is just a horrible miscarriage of justice here for General Flynn. And the reality is none of Flynn's contacts with the Russian government or Russian representatives was unlawful. This is what Andy McCarthy writes. The suggestion that Flynn's post-election contacts with Russia were improper, let alone unlawful, is absurd. But this is what he was in danger of going to prison for. Flynn was the designated national security advisor for the incoming administration and a key member of the Trump transition team. To have communications with officials of foreign governments was a legitimate and necessary part of his job. But now for the Obama administration, remember this started back when Obama was still in office and the Department of Justice was still under his control. The pressing matter for them was whether Flynn had promised the Russian ambassador that Trump would undo the sanctions and other penalties Obama had imposed. The recorded phone call between Flynn and Kislyak proved that Flynn had made no such commitment. Now, let me ask you this question, because that's what Flynn was convicted for lying about what he had told Kislyak. And he made no comment about these sanctions at all, it turns out, and he was accused of talking about sanctions about Kislyak and then lying about it. Phone call revealed he didn't talk about sanctions with Kislyak at all. So what do you suppose the FBI wanted to redact from the report? So if you guessed it was the paragraph describing the Flynn-Kislyak phone call, you're onto it. So the phone call in which he supposedly discussed sanctions with Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, which for some reason was supposed to be off limits, even though that was his job, it turns out he didn't discuss sanctions at all with Kislyak, and therefore he was accused of this. He pled guilty to this, of lying to federal investigators when there was nothing of the sort that was going on. In the call between General Flynn and Ambassador Kislyak, General Flynn requested that Russia not escalate the situation and only respond to the U.S. sanctions in a reciprocal manner. He did not talk about dropping sanctions with Russia. He was simply communicating with the Russian ambassador, and maybe what Andy McCarthy suggests, that's the real reason he was prosecuted, simply for communicating with the Russian ambassador, even though there was nothing improper, illegal, or unlawful about it. So apparently they had hoped to nail Flynn, Obama's people did, on a heinous crime, a corrupt deal to drop the sanctions as a quid pro quo for Putin's election meddling. In other words, what Flynn was supposed to have done was talk to Kislyak and say, look, if you'll help us meddle in the election, we will drop the sanctions against you. That's what the Obama team was hoping for, but there wasn't anything in there. Flynn's failure to acknowledge that sanctions were mentioned in his conversation with Kislyak, that's a mention that's so innocuous that the FBI couldn't even decide whether Flynn's failure to mention it was a lie or an innocent failure of recollection. The sanctions was a passing thing, barely mentioned, easy thing for Flynn to have forgotten. So here is the reality. Obama officials hounded Flynn because to this day they remain vindictive. This is about vindictiveness on the part of the Obama administration and Obama holdovers in the Department of Justice and the FBI, and they want to burn them to the ground. Now, what Andy McCarthy reminds us toward the end of this article is, look, Republican committees can carp all they like about Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, but the buck stops with the president. Time for him to do something. Back in 2.
This is Dr. Richard Lamb, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. 50 years ago this month, Paul Ehrlich, a Stanford biologist, wrote a book entitled The Population Bomb, and it sold 3 million copies, and unfortunately became the new statistical Bible for the governing class around the world. Ehrlich predicted that the earth had reached the saturation point for human beings. We had to do whatever was necessary to severely limit population growth. Otherwise, tens of millions of people would starve to death. This is the source of Planned Parenthood and other groups' extreme measures to stop people from having babies, including the Chinese government's coercive one-child policy, which has just recently been modified. Well, Ehrlich was spectacularly, tragically wrong about the Earth's capacity to sustain larger numbers of people. What Paul Ehrlich and those who followed him refused to understand is that a human being has one mouth to feed, yes, but a human being each has also 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 ears, 2 eyes, and a wonderfully, marvelously inventive brain to discover new things. Each new human being is a resource, not a detriment. In the past half-century, living standards have gone up worldwide while the population of the earth has soared. Human beings constantly find new and creative ways to better use and multiply the earth's resources and to be able to sustain yet more human life. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio. Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net. afa.net.
Welcome to Focal Point on American Family Radio with Brian Fisher. Brian Fisher is my name. Glad to have you in the conversation today, stacked and packed and locked and loaded. My latest column is up at afa.net. It's on the attacks on evangelicals who, like Robert Jeffress and Franklin Graham, who support Donald Trump. And the attack is coming from evangelicals, never Trumpers, who are also evangelicals, and they are going after evangelicals that do support Donald Trump and still continue to support him, absolutely hammer and tongs. So I'm going to talk about that at the top of the next hour, but if you'd like to get a jump start on that, you can go to afa.net and scroll down a little bit, and you will see the link to the column. Now let's get back on task here. Let's play clip number 1, because one of the issues that's coming up now with Donald Trump and Robert Mueller is whether Donald Trump is going to sit down with Robert Mueller and be interrogated. Now, here is Rudy Giuliani. Rudy, I think, has been kind of bouncing around, making things worse almost by the day. I think part of the problem, and again, I really like Rudy Giuliani. I really admire what he did as mayor in New York. He got the crime problem under control. Remember with that stop and frisk policy, and that was in minority neighborhoods. So he was protecting minorities from crime, and he got accused of being a racist because he was sending more police into minority communities. Why? Because that's where the crime was. So he's trying to protect minorities from criminal gangs and criminal activity, and he's the one that gets accused of being a racist. Anyway, got a lot of respect for Rudy Giuliani and all that. He's pro-choice, and so I don't want to see him anywhere near the Oval Office. But you get him on the stuff he's good at. He's pretty good at it. And but he's not a defense attorney. He's never been a defense attorney, and he's in a position right now where he's got to present himself and act as if he were a defense attorney. I don't think he really knows how to do it, and he's kind of freelancing, talking off the cuff, and he did talk without really having all the kind of information that you want an attorney really to have before he serves as a spokesman for you. So I think he's scrolling back some stuff he said that he probably shouldn't have said, trying to get the house in order and move forward. Now he's got a good attorney in Jay Sekulow, who is a good defense attorney, knows how to do it. So hopefully he will defer a little bit to Jay Sekulow. Now here is Rudy talking with George Stephanopoulos, our good friend Steffi, on Sunday morning about this business of Trump interviewing with Mueller. Here's what he had to say.
If he tells the truth as you would advise him to do, what is the danger in answering Robert Mueller's
Because they're
questions?
trying to trap. You couldn't put a lawyer on the show who wants to keep his law license to tell you he should testify.
But it's only a trap if the president tell the truth.
No, it isn't. It's only prosecutable if they have some built-up, manipulated evidence to prove the president didn't tell the truth. Well, how often has that happened?
If you have evidence that proves he doesn't tell the truth, then the president didn't tell the truth.
No, people do things like lie. People lie. Could Comey be lying? You're right, he could be lying, George. And we're going to walk ourselves into a trap like that?
Yeah, but
I couldn't.
If Mr. Comey lied to the special counsel, then he's the one who's vulnerable to perjury. If the president tells the truth, he's not.
And the special counsel has to be open to believing that. The special counsel so far seems to think that Comey is Moses. And I happen to think Comey is Judas.
But you believe the president is telling the truth. If you believe that, if you have that conviction, you're his attorney. Why don't you say, go in, talk to Robert Mueller, tell the truth?
Because I wouldn't be an attorney if I did that, George. I'd be living in some kind of unreal fantasy world that everybody tells the truth. I'm not going to set... They don't have a case on collusion. They don't have a case on obstruction, which is why they're asking all these cockamamie questions about what do you feel, what do you think. I'm going to walk them into a prosecution for perjury like Martha Stewart did? I mean, she'd tell you they weren't telling the truth. Martha Stewart would tell you that she told the truth, and they set her up.
So Martha Stewart, again, went to prison for a process crime. I mean, the original accusation was she'd engaged in insider trading, which apparently she had not, but they caught her in some kind of inconsistency, talked her into going in to talk to a prosecutor, and they caught her caught in a little word trap. Remember, that's what the opponents of Jesus did. They tried to catch him in something, trap him in something he might say. They got Martha Stewart, and Rudy Giuliani says, I'm not going to do that to my client. They're skilled at this kind of thing. These prosecutors, they know how to get people turned around. They know how to trick people into saying something they don't want to say. And you think about Donald Trump. I mean, whatever else is true about Donald Trump, the guy likes to talk. He loves to talk. He has a very fluid memory. He'll remember things differently. You know, his memory is so good, he can remember things that never even happened. That's just Donald Trump. That's who he is. He uses a lot of hyperbole, a lot of exaggeration. Everything is the greatest. It's the biggest. It's the most in history. That's just the way he talks. And you have to learn to sort of account for that when you try to parse what he has to say. Well, he goes in to talk to a prosecutor. They're going to press that thing to the floor and try to get him in trouble. Now, here's what Rudy says, clip number 2. Here's what we are really looking for.
I'd rather have the Hillary Clinton treatment.
I think President Clinton was before
But I would rather have the Hillary
more
Clinton.
than 2.5 hours.
No, he was 2.5 hours in the grand jury. Probably, maybe 3. We'll take 3. But Hillary Clinton treatment is what I'm looking for. And that is no under oath, only a Q&A, and then we get the questions in advance, and they write the report 2 weeks before.
Now, that's what happened with Hillary Clinton. What he's talking about, this goes back, again, when James Comey was in charge of the FBI. And remember, there was an email investigation into how she'd handled the loose way she'd handled emails on a private server at her home, which is illegal to begin with, and 30-some thousand emails that have just disappeared, and classified emails that were on that server that she sent to Huma Abedin, who in turn put them on her husband's computer. So Anthony Weiner's walking around with this top secret classified information on his computer because Hillary was sloppy with handling classified information. Every one of those transfers represents a felony offense. And Hillary walked. Why? Well, they actually brought her in to talk to Hillary, the FBI did, but they did not put her under oath. There was a simple Q&A. Nobody was recording it. She got the questions in advance, and then Mueller, even before they did that interview with Hillary Clinton, had already written her exoneration letter before the FBI had even talked to her. Now, Rudy says that's the kind of treatment that we're looking for. Good luck with that. Now, clip number 3, here's Tucker Carlson. He's asking a really, really good question here because the information that would enable us to answer Tucker Carlson's questions is available, but nobody's got it. Here's Tucker Carlson.
In D.C., only the Mueller investigation matters. So you may wonder, what is the Mueller investigation? What is it about? What exactly is Mueller investigating? Turns out almost nobody knows, except Rod Rosenstein. He knows, but he won't tell Congress. Last summer, Rosenstein wrote a memo detailing the scope of the independent counsel investigation. Key portions of that memo remain hidden from view. Congress would like to see them and has every right to see them. Our Constitution requires our elected representatives to supervise the Department of Justice. Why is that? Well, so that bureaucrats with massive law enforcement and surveillance powers remain accountable to voters. We give them guns, let them arrest us, send us to prison, allow them to break into our private email accounts, tap our phones. They have a lot of power. In return, they promise not to misuse that power. And if there's any question about their honesty, we get to check. That's what transparency is.
You know, so he says, look, you know, the real question here, what exactly is Mueller investigating? And the answer is nobody knows. The only one that knows is Rod Rosenstein, because he's the one that wrote the memo called the scope memo, detailing the scope of the independent investigation. What's the scope? What can you go after? What are you supposed to go after? What are the limits? But there are key portions of that memo that nobody has seen other than Rod Rosenstein and Bob Mueller. They're concealed from public view. Now, Congress would like to see them. They want to know what's going on with the charade. You know, and our Constitution requires that our elected representatives supervise the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice, ladies and gentlemen, is not in the Constitution. It's a creation of the Congress of the United States. So they have every right to review and oversee the work that the Department of Justice does and to poke into it when there are questions. Now, obviously, bureaucrats don't want this kind of poking around. They don't want to be accountable to the voters. They don't want to be accountable to Congress. They don't want to be accountable to the public. But you know what Tucker Carlson points out? We give them guns. We let them arrest us. We let them send us to prison. We allow them to break into our private email accounts and into our houses and to tap our phones. They've got a lot of power. We have a right to understand what's going on behind the curtain. And that's what Congress is trying to get at. That's what Devin Nunes is trying to get at. And this is what Congress is stonewalling our representatives on. Now, we've got just time to squeeze this one in. This is clip number 2, Tucker Carlson.
Government bureaucrats hate transparency. They'd rather do their work in secret. Secrecy is the shield that protects them from our scrutiny. And not just in this case. Consider the House Intelligence Committee investigation into Russian collusion. It was just completed. It took a year to complete. The final report ran to 253 pages. Yet the rest of us couldn't really read it because key facts were missing. Just how many Trump associates did the Obama administration spy on during the 2016 campaign? It would be nice to know that. Sorry, it's redacted. Is there any actual proof that the Russian government directed hacking of the DNC and John Podesta's Gmail account? Well, if there is, that's been redacted too. Or how about this? The report says that the FBI agents who interviewed Mike Flynn didn't believe he was lying. But wait, Mike Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to those agents, and his life was destroyed as the result. He just sold his house to raise money for his legal defense. So what's going on here? Well, we don't know. That information was redacted. Why were all these redactions made? We don't even know that. We asked, no one would tell us. And then there's the FISA application to spy on Trump campaign aide Carter Page. That hasn't been released either, even though we now have ample reason to believe the application may have been fundamentally illegitimate, based heavily on discredited partisan hearsay, the Steele dossier.
There have been people who have been making threats privately and publicly against me for quite some time, and I think they should understand by now the Department of Justice is not going to be extorted. We're going to do what's required by the rule of law, and any kind of threats that anybody makes are not going to affect the way we do our job.
Little victim. Extorted? How about accountable? Nobody elected Rod Rosenstein to anything or any of these people. They work for us, supposedly on our behalf. When they won't explain what they're doing or why they're doing it, it is a sure sign, always and everywhere, that they have begun to work against us. That's what it means.
And it's time for Jeff Sessions to step up to the plate and do something about this. Remember, he only recused himself on stuff that had to do with the election. A lot of this stuff doesn't have anything to do with the election.
Art is a learned discipline, and teaching that to children can be fun and easy with DVD collections by artist Barry Stebbing.
It looks kind of like a beautiful sunset sky. See all those colors coming off your brush?
Learn the fundamentals of painting and drawing with a teacher-friendly curriculum.
You don't have to outline everything in your drawings, especially when you do flowers and leaves. You let them breathe and you let light come into them.
Start your DVD collection by Barry Stebbing at afastore.net.
Who is God? What is He like? How can we know? Your answer to these questions will impact your worship, discipleship, apologetics, and evangelism. Learn from Ravi Zacharias, Josh McDowell, Chip Ingram, and more than 60 other speakers at Southern Evangelical Seminary's 25th Annual National Conference on Christian Apologetics. It's October 12th and 13th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Get the early bird discount when you register by August 1st at ses.edu.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I had a lot of credit card debt and I couldn't pay my bills. I was feeling so bad. I got to a point where I needed some help. So I reached out and contacted Trinity.
If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813 to talk to a certified counselor.
They were able to take all of my different payments and put them all together.
Trinity will consolidate your accounts into one easy-to-manage monthly payment, put a stop to late fees and over-limit charges, reduce your interest, and possibly improve your credit score. You'll save thousands.
And they were actually able to work with my creditors. I've been able to pay off close to $15,000 in the last 18 months.
If your debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Stephanie, and I'm debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Howdy, welcome back to Focal Point. On Monday, we'll take your calls now. Hannah standing by to receive your calls. Give her your name and the city you're from. The number to call, 888. First name, by the way, first name and the city you're calling from. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. 888-589-8840. Love to know what you think about the Mueller investigation, what we've talked about today, that Michael Flynn apparently was railroaded, that nobody knows exactly what Mueller is investigating because Rosenstein will not share the full extent of the scope memo with us. We see that the DOJ, the FBI, using redactions to conceal from us information, not in order to protect national security, but to protect their own hides, because they're concealing information that would lead, for example, to the exoneration of Michael Flynn. So I'd love to know what your take is on all of that. One more clip, Jeff. Let's go to clip number 6. This is Mark Penn, who was a veteran of Clinton world. He was one of the highest and closest advisors to the Clinton team back during Bill Clinton's term in office. And Tucker Carlson is talking about a column he wrote that raised questions that I think are worth probing.
You wrote kind of an amazing piece the other day in The Hill, titled something like "Questions I Have for Robert Mueller." Tell us some of the questions that, if you could ask, you would.
Well, remember, Tucker, I spent a year working with President Clinton against Ken Starr and that effort. And I just find
remember very well.
I just find that was child's play to what's going on here. And I think that, well, Mueller has some questions about what the president was thinking when he fired Comey. Well, I certainly have some questions about what he was thinking when first he went to apply for the FBI job in the first place with Rosenstein and then turns around the next day. Didn't he already have a plan when he turned around? Boy, when he put that team together and there wasn't a single Trump donor, what was he thinking then? And when he looked at these dossiers and discovered that there was no foundation here, how did he deal with that? And how does he justify, these kinds of really stormtrooper tactics? I think is perhaps not an exaggeration when you go guns drawn to political consultants, wiretaps all over the place over payments to porn stars. This thing has gotten out of control, and while he wants to question the president, it seems that no one can really question either Mueller or Comey or Rosenstein, and that is precisely the problem.
So I think Mark Penn, this guy's a Democrat, remember. This is kind of an amazing admission on his part. If you want to ask questions of somebody about motives, intent, what was in your mind, it's time for people to start asking Mueller what was in his mind. Why did you go to Rosenstein to ask for this job in the first place? Why did you stack this team with nothing but Democrats and Hillary Clinton donors? Why didn't you seek some kind of ideological balance on your team? And then you look at the Steele dossier and discover there's absolutely no foundation there for any kind of a FISA warrant. Then how do you justify what you did. What was your thinking when you sent armed people, armed law enforcement agents, busting in to Manafort's home in the middle of the night? His wife's in the nightgown. Kids are being rousted out of bed, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. What were you thinking? That's how you treat mafia dons. That's what you do when you want to bust into their houses. That's what you do. What in the world were you thinking? So he says, look, the one that ought to be answering questions is not Donald Trump. It is Bob Mueller, and right now nobody is asking those questions. You know, Jeff Reed has a great term for Jeff Sessions. You coined this some time ago. Everybody wondering, where is Jeff Sessions? And you had a great analogy.
I've been calling him the elf on the shelf for a while now.
He's like the elf on the shelf. You know, I have tremendous admiration and affection and respect for Jeff Sessions. But he's like the elf on the shelf. He just sits up there and just looks and watches while everything happens.
Yeah.
And yet he's the guy that's in charge of bringing some kind of order to all of this. He can fire anybody he wants. He's in charge of the Department of Justice. And he can intervene in any probe that doesn't have to do with the 2016 election. All that stuff with Manafort, that goes back to business deals with Ukraine, goes back to 2006. What in the world does that have to do with the 2016 election? And like Mark Penn, this Democrat, says, this thing has completely gotten out of control. It's gotten completely off the rails. I think you're even getting to the point when you got a guy like Mark Penn's disturbed at what a Democrat like Mueller's doing, well, putedly a Republican, but not. And when even he's disturbed at what's going on and trying to get a Republican president, you know you've got a problem. All right, let's go to the phones. Let's begin with Rosemary in Cuero, Texas. Rosemary, what's on your mind? Talk to me.
God bless you.
Thank you.
If I was the president, I would fire Jeff Sessions before I could get his last name out of my mouth. Number two, why do we need to pay all of the lawyers that Mueller has? He doesn't need that many lawyers. The president doesn't have that many lawyers. That's crazy. Number three, I want to know how can we get it on the ballot. That's another reason why. This is another reason why we need term sessions, because some of the voters don't know who they're voting for or why they are voting, what they're voting for. But if we had term limits, then we wouldn't have to worry about getting rid of those people after their time is up. Number four, I want to know why you, Abraham Hamilton, and some of the other people on the American Family Radio are not running for an office. You all would be the best people up there. We can get other people to man the radio that's respectful. I'll even do it. Love you.
Well, Rosemary, when you say you'd even do it, we need a replacement on Focal Point. I'm going to pick you.
You do that.
You got the
I'll be there.
All right. Thank you. So, Rosemary, I just want to get clarification on one small thing. I wasn't really sure. Do I read you right that you're not a fan of Jeff Sessions? Did I interpret that correctly? Just teasing.
Not now. I'm not, because if you won't protect our president, no, I'm not.
All right, Rosemary. Listen, I appreciate the call. Love that call, Rosemary. That was terrific stuff. Well, I'll have to ask Abe about why he hasn't run for office. He'd be the guy to do it. You know, lawyers are the ones that are the best candidates to run for public office. There'd be no way I could do it, Rosemary. Couldn't do it. Couldn't happen in my case. There's too much stuff the left has slandered me with, they've smeared me with, stuff they've taken out of context, stuff they've twisted, stuff they've distorted, and they have just damaged my reputation, frankly, beyond recovery. I can't live long enough to undo the damage that they have done to my reputation. So that's a non-starter for me. Plus, I'll tell you something. I haven't said this in a while, but I had people in Idaho when I lived there recruiting me to run for office, people from the Republican Party trying to recruit me to run for office. And I said, I'm not going to do it, and there's two reasons why. Oh, what are your reasons? Well, number one, it's not what I'm called to do. And number two, I wouldn't live long enough to actually run because my wife would shoot me the minute I declared for office. So it ain't going to happen. But appreciate the suggestion and the support, Rosemary. Thank you. Let's go to Stu, Leesville, Louisiana. Stu, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, I'm echoing the same thing the lady just said. I remember when the hurricane hit us down here in Louisiana, they had a lot of fraud that went on with Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
And there was things done wrong, and years on down the road, even now, we still got people that are being prosecuted. How do we stop this great American fraud from Mueller and Sessions and all these people that are robbing the taxpayers' money blind? It is fraud.
Yeah.
There is no collusion, and it needs to be brought to an end now, and somebody needs to look at prosecuting these people.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Stu, here's the deal. I've been easy on Trump on this whole deal, but I think at some point, you know, we love Trump. We support him. He's our guy. But Donald Trump can straighten this thing out in one afternoon. Donald Trump is in charge of the entire executive branch. If he wants an investigation terminated, he can terminate it. If he wants Rod Rosenstein fired, he can fire him. If he wants Robert Mueller fired, he can get somebody in the Attorney General's office to fire him. So at some point, we need to start looking at Donald Trump and maybe urging him to step in. He's threatened to do it. Just last week, he said, you know, I may have to, I've been hands off. I've been trying to stay out of this whole deal. I've been hands off, but I may have to get back involved in this thing to get it straightened out. I think he realizes this investigation has gone on way too long. They've got no crime. They've got nothing to charge him with. There's no evidence of collusion, no evidence of obstruction, no evidence of any kind of even contact with the Russians about the 2016 election. All right, Stu, good call. Let's go to Barbara in Victoria, Texas. Barbara, welcome. What's on your mind?
Well, I agree with Rosemary and the last caller. This country, I'm so concerned, Brian, for it. I feel like the Hebrews must have felt when they were between the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them. So in that regard, I want to mention one more thing. I've been hurting a long time regarding General Flynn. Mm-hmm. He stood strong during the Obama administration, and he was the first domino, as you pointed out, to fall and be unjustly accused. And as you pointed out, just trying to survive, he couldn't afford the law, the lawyer, the legal expenses. So I wonder if we could pray for God to restore double to General Flynn what he has lost, and that if he would deliver us, forgive us our sins as a nation, individually, corporately, as a nation, and heal this land and deliver us from the hands of Egypt, which means the world, Babylon, the globalists, all of the powers that are trying to topple our republic.
All right, Barbara. Well, let's take a moment just to pray right now for these things. Ask Barbara to join me and our whole listening audience to pray for General Flynn and for our country. Heavenly Father, we pray first of all for General Flynn. Lord, our heart is grieved to see what this unjust prosecution, this vindictiveness has done to him, to his reputation, to his family resources. We pray that you'll restore him, that you will restore double, that you will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. We pray, Lord, for justice to come. We pray for wisdom for Donald Trump, that he would exercise his authority over the executive branch wisely at this time. In Jesus' name.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
How beautiful is the laugh of a baby. Some only believe that life begins when the baby is born, but that's just not so. Psalm 139:13 tells us that God knits us together in the womb at conception. The heartbeat begins in the womb, and the unborn baby is able to respond to sounds and touch. That's why it's our duty and privilege to fight for the sanctity of life. Thank you for joining that fight from AFA.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. 1,700 people have had to flee their homes thanks to the volcano on Hawaii's Big Island that's still erupting. On Sunday, some residents were allowed to return to their homes to collect pets, medication, and other essential items. Fox's William Lajeunesse reports.
Some homes were untouched, others were literally being swallowed up
right before their eyes by the lava. And this is Leilani Estates. It's a community of about 700 homes. It was built right on top of a rift zone, about 24 miles downslope from the summit of the Kilauea volcano. And last week, geologists believe one of those small earthquakes dislodged a plug in the volcanic lake near the top, sending millions of tons of thick lava, molten rock, down through a series of underground tubes beneath the subdivision.
26 homes have been destroyed by the volcano. 69-year-old Joseph Edwards Abels is in police custody after shooting a Florida sheriff's deputy in the head Sunday morning. Deputy William Gentry responded to a call about a neighbor shooting a cat in Lake Placid. Sheriff Paul Blackman says Abels has a history of violence.
He does have a criminal background and a couple of felony convictions for battery on law enforcement officers and such as that.
Gentry is in critical condition in the hospital in Fort Myers. A federal judge in Virginia has strongly rebuked Robert Mueller and his team for overstepping their mandate.
Judge T.S. Ellis, a Reagan appointee, told Bob Mueller's attorney that the Trump-Russia probe had gone out of its lane when it charged former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort with financial crimes, including tax and bank fraud. Walker Wildman hosts AFR's Exposing Washington.
The main thing that he pointed out was that they don't have the authority to charge Manafort on the crimes or suspected crimes that they're trying to charge him on.
Judge Ellis told the Mueller lawyers, quote, "What you really care about is what information Mr. Manafort could give you that would reflect on Mr. Trump or lead to his prosecution or impeachment." He later summed up the Mueller argument as, quote, "We said this was what the investigation was about, but we're not bound by it and we were lying." Then he ordered them to produce the original, unredacted mandate of the special counsel.
This is the first rebuke that we've seen where it questions the authority that Mueller's team has, and it's an argument that we've been making here at American Family Association for many months now, that Mueller's team has only the authority to investigate potential collusion between the Donald Trump campaign and the Russian government. Everything outside of that is outside of their authority.
Wildman says even if the judge eventually rules along the lines of his rebuke, it only strikes a minor blow to the out-of-control investigation.
I still think this is not going to be settled until either Donald Trump or Attorney General Jeff Sessions puts a final end to the Mueller probe.
I'm Steve Jordahl.
A small Jewish congregation is suing the city of Dallas over religious discrimination.
The Orthodox Jewish Synagogue has been meeting in a Dallas home since 2013, much like others who meet in their homes for a Bible study, game night, or book club. At the city's request and in an effort to meet all city requirements, the congregation applied for a parking variance. It would enable the congregation to continue meeting in its Dallas neighborhood home, but the city rejected the congregation's application. Attorney Jeremy Dice of First Liberty Institute says Dallas is denying the congregation's basic religious liberty rights.
Only the government will require this congregation to have parking spaces, and quite a few parking spaces at that, for a congregation that walks to their Sabbath services and are not permitted to operate a vehicle on their Sabbath.
Unless a court intervenes, Dice says the city of Dallas is going to force these people from the city limits.
They have to live within walking distance of their place of worship, and this is not going to be able to be done unless the court intervenes. If you can use your home to have the Oprah Book of the Month Club and a poker night, you should be able to also use that home to be able to have religious services or religious meetings, I should say, on their Sabbath.
I'm Chris Woodward.
American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Exposing Washington with Walker Wildman.
So who is responsible for the dysfunction in Washington? That's what we're going to be discussing today.
We have become one of the most litigious societies on the planet.
The goal of this show is to bring clarity to the news coming out of Washington, D.C., and to expose the deception that has plagued our nation's capital for decades.
Exposing Washington.
Each Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central.
On American Family Radio.
What is the Mueller investigation? What is it about? What exactly is Mueller investigating? Turns out almost nobody knows. Government bureaucrats hate transparency. They'd rather do their work in secret.
What is the danger in answering Robert Mueller's
Because they're
questions?
trying to trap. You couldn't put a lawyer on the show who wants to keep his law license to tell you he should testify.
When they won't explain what they're doing or why they're doing it, It is a sure sign, always and everywhere, that they have begun to work against us.
The special counsel so far seems to think that Comey is Moses. And I happen to think Comey is Judas.
How does he justify these kinds of stormtrooper tactics?
But Hillary Clinton treatment is what I'm looking for. And that is no under oath, only a Q&A, and then we get the questions in advance, and they write the report 2 weeks before.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Even I'm getting in on the act here in the Focal Point studio. Second hour of Focal Point. Glad to have you in the conversation. Welcome however you're here, whether you're live streaming us on Facebook, which you can do right now. We record the program, upload it to the website, publish it with an extensive table of contents. You might be live streaming us on YouTube. A lot of our viewers are using YouTube as a way to keep in touch. And again, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can click the little bell there, and it'll give you a notification every time a new live program, a Focal Point starts. You can go to the YouTube channel after the program if you happen to miss it during the day, and you can get virtually what amounts to a podcast by going to the YouTube channel. You may be listening on one of our 184 stations that comprise the American Family Radio network. You also might be using the apps for the iPhone and the Android to listen on the go. And don't forget, you can get podcasts. You can also audio stream us live by going to afr.net, listen through your computer. And also you can get podcasts. We got the podcast function. If you go to the Facebook page, click on the Learn More button. It'll take you right to the podcast page. And you can also go to afr.net, click on the AFR Talk button, scroll down, and you'll hit the podcast page.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff to go and walk through. You know, the only thing missing, and I'm working on it, is putting some bleachers on the other side of that window for a studio audience. How would you like that?
Yeah.
That'd be cool, wouldn't it?
And then get some CGI people to put in them. Just project people in there. So anyway, good to have you with us. Good to have you in the conversation. A couple of quick items before I jump into topic of my column. This is hilarious. Alyssa Milano is a musician. I wouldn't recognize her if she walked up on the street and bit me in the leg, but I've recognized her name, and apparently she's a recording artist of some note. She went to the NRA, to an anti-NRA rally to protest guns. And you know who was with her? An armed security contingent. You believe that? I mean, the hypocrisy from these people is just kind of off the charts. Here's another instance of the incredible bias. I mean, incredible bias in education. You wonder why our culture is going down the drain? I would say, well, there's a lot of culprits you can blame, but one of them is our education system, which is totally now, even from kindergarten, they're introducing kindergarten kids, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, to transgenderism, trying to convince these little kindergartners and preschoolers that it's normal. And so that's going on. They're not even asking parents' permission to do it. Then you go right up to college. Here's what's happening in college. This is an article published by the National Association of Scholars. Do you know that 39% of all of the colleges in America do not have one single Republican professor? 39% of all of the institutions of higher education in America do not have a single, not one, Republican professor. And it's not that great when you get to the other 61%. Most of them are barely above the zero mark. 78.2% of the academic departments that he sampled, like the English department and the philosophy department and so forth, that he sampled, 78.2% of them either had zero Republicans or so few, too few, to make a difference. And he did a pretty thorough study. This guy named Langbert, he's Mitchell Langbert, he's an associate professor of business at Brooklyn College. He sampled 8,688 tenure-track professors with PhDs. The overall ratio is 12.7 to 1, Democrat to Republicans, in college faculties at all levels. 12.7 Democrats to every one single Republican.
Hey, Brian, before you put that away, is there any numbers on how many communications professors there might be?
You know, I have another article that this is
journalism and
yeah,
stuff?
you know, I had that last week. I've got it in my stack in my office.
I bet that was
from last Friday.
That was real low.
Yeah, and in communications and journalism, I mean, that's really where we need conservative voices of objectivity and reason, and they're not there either. Heavily dominated, overwhelming by liberals. Now, again, I mentioned that my column is up at afa.net. It's on evangelicals, Stormy Daniels, and Donald Trump. There's a small number of evangelicals and I read them all the time. A lot of them are very good writers and people that I really like David French at National Review Online. I read most everything he writes. He's a smart guy. He's a solid evangelical Christian, but he's a never Trumper. He was against Trump from the beginning, and he's still against Trump. And not only is he against Trump, he's against those of us evangelicals. And again, this is an intramural deal. I'm not saying that David French is not a Christian, not an evangelical, because he is, but his view is so different on Donald Trump than mine, and he attacks us. He attacks evangelicals that still support Donald Trump. He accuses us of compromising our moral convictions for the sake of earthly relief, of rationalizing and justifying sinful actions to preserve political influence or a popular audience, justifying silence in the face of sin, and protecting this administration in order to preserve our presence in the halls of power. And then he invokes a curse over us from Isaiah 5:20. Woe, that's a curse. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. And Heavenly Father, I come before you to rebuke this curse, to break the power of this curse over evangelicals who read this and hear this. Pray that you would break the power of this curse over them. And every place where Satan is intended to curse, I pray that you would release blessing. So this is really strong stuff that David French is talking about. You know, practically exhausted the thesaurus to come up with invective directed at evangelicals. Now, I'm only one evangelical, and I don't have any power to preserve in public, in corridors of power, any access to preserve, so I can just speak for myself here. You know, with regard to the Stormy Daniels event, I think that affair probably happened. Only two people know for sure. And Stormy Daniels 3 times filed affidavits saying it didn't happen. Donald Trump has denied it. Anyway, only 2 people know for sure. For myself, the $130,000 payoff, that's enough for me because people don't pay hush money to people who don't need to be hushed. So I'm perfectly willing to accept that this thing happened back in 2006. Now, the thing I want to point out here is no evangelicals I know defend cavorting with porn stars. I don't even know what David French is talking about. We're justifying sin. No evangelical I know justifies this kind of behavior. You know, when I've addressed this on my program, as my regular listeners know, I've used words such as reprehensible and tawdry to describe this conduct. Now, it did happen 12 years ago, if it happened at all, and the president does seem to be a changed man. Sounds more like a Christian every time I hear him, for example, at the National Day of Prayer event last week. Now, here's one last thought. If President Trump is a changed man, why is that? My suggestion is it may be that while critics are sniping at him from cloistered cover, evangelical leaders like Robert Jeffress and Franklin Graham are befriending the president. They are spending time with him. They are counseling him from the scriptures, and they are praying for him. Isn't this exactly what evangelicals are supposed to be about? Back with a special guest. Stay with us.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
A federal government website called The Wall of Shame lists data breaches affecting 500 patients or more. The reporting and recording began in 2009. the year Congress mandated electronic medical records. Breaches affecting less than 500 patients don't have to be reported, but often are. The website does not list them. However, the federal government has received nearly 345,000 reports of smaller breaches and nearly 2,300 reports of larger breaches. That makes a total of more than 347,000 breaches affecting about 178 million individuals.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly E-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
Meet Dan Steiner, president of Preborn.
Jill came into our center about 8 months ago, and she was in a really difficult spot because her husband her boyfriend was incarcerated. She didn't have a place to live. She's out on the street. She came into our center, and when she saw her baby on the ultrasound, she says, I've got to find a way to do this. She changed from abortion-minded to wanting to choose life for her baby, and that's where we came in, coming beside that ultrasound with baby clothes, with housing for her. Her baby just delivered last Wednesday. It's a little boy. He's beautiful. That's the power of ultrasound.
80% of women choose life when they see their baby on ultrasound. To find out more about how you can help save a baby's life, go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Or dial pound 250 and say keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name, congenial, convivial, amiable, and effervescent. As always, the program is Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio, and you are listening to American Family Radio Network. Glad to have you in the conversation. Want to welcome to our decision maker line Jim Campbell. Jim is a senior counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom, short ADF for short, and he is with us. Jim, thank you for being with us. Welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Well, Jim, it's great to have you on, and I wanted to bring you on because of a topic of great significance, I believe, for the topic, the issue of religious freedom. This will be of interest to our listeners. We are familiar with the work of ADF, one of the finest First Amendment law firms in the country, doing a great job defending religious freedom. And Jim, ADF has gotten into the crosshairs recently, just over the last weekend, basically, of one of the biggest companies in America, and that's Amazon. I want to have you tell us in a second what they did. But first of all, what was the program that was at issue? What program did Amazon have here that you at that time participated in?
So Amazon, for a while now, has had a program called Amazon Smile. It's a charitable program where any nonprofit group, I shouldn't quite say every, but significant number of nonprofit groups can participate. And these groups are groups from all across the political and ideological spectrum. So you have groups that many would define as leftist, and you have groups that many would define on the right, and all of them are able to participate in this program. ADF was a participant up until a few weeks ago when Amazon removed us from the program, and we came to find out that it was because of the Southern Poverty Law Center that Amazon decided to remove us.
So with this, it's called Amazon Smile, and any customer of Amazon's could designate the nonprofit of their choice on this Amazon Charity Smile, and a portion of every Amazon purchase would go to that nonprofit. So the customers were in control of where this sliver of Amazon income would go. And up until a few weeks ago, as Jim Campbell, our guest, pointed out, ADF was on that. Now, I don't know how much money they generated from that. That's immaterial at this point. But there was a way for people to support the great work of Alliance Defending Freedom, and that freedom now is gone. Amazon has removed them from the Charity Smile program. And you indicated, Jim, that they used the auspices of the Southern Poverty Law Center to do it. So Southern Poverty Law Center has a hate group list. Tell us about that hate group list, and tell us about what you can tell us about the Southern Poverty Law Center and why this is just a horrible organization for Amazon to take its cue from?
The Southern Poverty Law Center is an organization that historically did some very important work, but over the last few decades it has definitely lost its way. It's an organization that is political and partisan in what it does, and it's created these hate lists, groups of organizations that it has identified over 900, so that shows you just how broadly they understand the concept of hate to be. And it places any group on there that it disagrees with, that it has different political views, different ideological views. And so as a result of Alliance Defending Freedom's religious, faith-based advocacy, we have been placed on that list. And unfortunately, Amazon has decided to enshrine this Southern Poverty Law Center organization as the gatekeeper to its charitable Amazon Smile program. And that is ultimately what brought about the end of Alliance Defending Freedom's participation in that program.
You know, you think about SPLC, talking here with Jim Campbell of the Alliance Defending Freedom. You know, I've followed them for years. We were one of the first pro-family groups to be put on their hate group list, along with Family Research Council in D.C. We were put on their list almost at the same time back in about 2010. And then they started adding other conservative and pro-family groups like ADF and others to their hate group list. But their most recent numbers, Jim, indicate to me that they spent about $3 million in legal activities. And remember, this is the Southern Poverty Law Center. So they bill themselves as an organization that does a lot of legal work in order to protect civil rights. They did $3 million worth of legal defense, which sounds like a lot of money until you discover that they've got $477 million banked somewhere in the Bahamas or the Bermuda or someplace like that. So they're stockpiling almost $500 million in donor money, Jim, and spending just a tiny pittance of it on legal activity. And so it looks like mostly what they're trying to do is take people out of commission by convincing them to use the hate group list. And Jim, I don't know how much of this you followed, but the FBI and the Pentagon have stopped using them as a source.
Yes, I am familiar with that, and I think that is very telling. It shows us that these well-respected government agencies do not want to continue to use this organization because it doesn't trust the list and the information that it's putting together. So at the end of the day, the Southern Poverty Law Center tries to portray itself as this neutral watchdog organization that tells us who's a hateful group and who isn't. But what we really find, and I think what you just said touches on this, is that it's a fundraising machine that raises money, given its work slandering people and organizations that disagree with it. At the end of the day, one of the things that's most problematic for me is that this organization, by throwing around the word hate everywhere it goes, really destroys the ability for us to engage in civil discourse throughout society. It takes that away, and it uses labels to shut down a good faith discussion of important issues.
You know, the reality, Jim, too, is that hate group label it's just plain wrong. We don't hate anybody. We don't hate a single soul on planet Earth. You know, we disagree with people. We may disagree with people about whether the homosexual lifestyle is something that a rational society ought to promote and celebrate, or whether two gay people ought to be permitted to marry. We may have a genuine disagreement about that, but that doesn't mean we hate anybody. Disagreement is not hatred. And yet on the left, they're convinced that it is. And so if you disagree with them, you pointed this out, this is just groups that disagree with the SPLC. And they slapped a hate group label on them, and then again try to so damage their reputation that nobody will do business with them in the future. And I don't know if this had anything to do with it, Jim. Maybe you could comment on this. We don't know without getting inside somebody's head there at Amazon. But you have defended one of the most prominent civil rights cases that's in front of the Supreme Court is the one with Jack Phillips of Masterpiece Cake Shop in Colorado. And you, ADF, you defended him. Tell us what the status of that case is and why maybe this would have motivated Amazon to come after you.
Well, so that case is currently pending before the Supreme Court. It involves Jack Phillips, who's a cake artist in the state of Colorado. He's a gentleman that does and always has served everyone. Anyone that comes into his store, he's happy to serve them. He'll sell them anything available on his shelf, and he'll make a custom cake for them for many occasions. One thing he can't do is make a cake to celebrate a same-sex wedding. Now, of course, there are a number of other things he can't do because of his faith. He can't create cakes to celebrate Halloween. He can't. He was once asked to celebrate a divorce through a cake, and he declined to do that. So at the end of the day, Jack is someone that will serve all people, but he can't create a custom cake to celebrate an event or convey an idea that conflicts with his faith. Because of his decision not to help create a cake celebrating a same-sex wedding, he was essentially sued, and he has been tied up in the court system now for over, well, it'll be almost 6 years here next month. And so what we at Alliance Defending Freedom have done is we've come in and we've defended Jack. We've made the case that Jack did not discriminate against anyone when you really understand the meaning of the term discrimination. And to the extent that the state tried to punish him here, they were violating his First Amendment rights.
In fact, I would say, Jim, if anybody's been discriminated against here, talking here with Jim Campbell, a senior counsel at the Alliance Defending Freedom, if anybody's been discriminated against here, it's Jack Phillips. Because the law is very clear, you cannot discriminate against somebody based on their religion. But this is exactly what homosexual advocates are doing, the homosexual lobby is doing. They are discriminating against him, trying to punish him, silence him, even drive him out of business because of his religious conviction. So the real victim of discrimination, at least from my vantage point, is Jack Phillips. And very quickly on that case, Jim, I don't know how much you can share with us, but from what I've read, the questioning of the attorneys indicated that the Supreme Court may be leaning toward finding and ruling in his behalf. Of course, we won't know till their ruling is issued, but the questioning seemed to be favorable to Jack Phillips' case.
Well, you know, it's always difficult to tell. There were very tough questions posed to the attorneys on both sides, but I will share this thing with you, which is one piece of the argument that I think was significant. One of the questions put to the state's attorney, and again, the state here is the one that's targeting and punishing Jack Phillips. And what the specific question was from Justice Anthony Kennedy, and he said that from his perspective that tolerance is essential in any free society, and tolerance is most meaningful when it's mutual. And then he went on to say, and his concern is that in this case, the state has been neither tolerant nor respectful of Mr. Phillips' religious beliefs. And so we're very hopeful that that does reflect ultimately where the court might land, but you know, it's very difficult to predict based off of
and that is a hopeful sign, because Justice Kennedy, go correct to 1996 in the Romer v. Evans case in Colorado, and then you fast forward to the Lawrence v. Texas case in 2003 and the Obergefell case in 2015, these major leaps forward for the homosexual agenda. Anthony Kennedy is the guy that wrote the majority opinion, I believe, in all of those cases. You know, and one of our concerns from the very beginning, Jim, has been that the homosexual agenda represents a tremendous threat to religious liberty. Every advance of the homosexual agenda, in my judgment, has to come at the expense of religious liberty. That's what we're seeing with Jack Phillips. The homosexual agenda advances. His religious liberty is constricted at the same time and by the same amount. Well, what's the next step? We got about 40 seconds left, Jim. What's the next step for ADF with regard to this Amazon Smiles situation?
Well, our biggest focus has been to make people aware of what Amazon's doing. We simply want people to know the type of organization that Amazon is, the type of organizations that it affiliates with, and we want folks to decide whether to continue to do business with Amazon based off of what they now know. And also, the second point that we would emphasize is to reach out if anyone is troubled by this and ask Amazon, why are they relying on a discredited organization like the Southern Poverty Law Center to determine who can participate in its charitable programs?
Our guest has been Jim Campbell, Senior Counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom, defending themselves against Amazon's banishing of them from their charity program as a hate group. Be right back.
Okay, so the big question for any decision you're going to make, is this actually going to work? Well, if you've heard about MediShare, which is a brilliant way of sharing healthcare costs, you may have wondered that. Does it work? Well, so did Dr. Stuart Hoover, who initially joined to save a lot of money. The typical family saves about $500 a month. Stuart saved even more.
When we first joined MediShare, we were immediately going from a little over $1,600 a month down to $460 basically a month.
So that's wonderful, but then his wife needed emergency surgery and the bills added up to $160,000.
So we were seeing the bills coming in, and then the bills were being paid. Portions were being shared, and the end result of this is this bill was taken care of.
Yes, MediShare works, and it's so easy to get your questions answered too, so why not? You can call right now, 855-PSALM-23. That's 855-PSALM-23. 855-PSALM-23.
Since the day the American Family Association began asking you to sign a petition urging the cancellation of 13 Reasons Why, Netflix has made some changes. They've added disclaimers before episodes and even a link to a suicide prevention hotline number. This is progress, but it's not enough. If you have signed the petition, thank you. If you haven't, please do. Netflix continues to ignore our request for a meeting to discuss the dangers of their show. And they're still going forward with the release of Season 2 of this dangerous program. Too many teens have taken their own lives after watching 13 Reasons Why, a program which seems to suggest suicide as a viable option. Your signature and prayers could help convince Netflix to reconsider their social responsibility. Even one more teen suicide would be infinitely too many. Please read and sign the Netflix petition at afa.net.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher.
Brian J. Fisher.
Howdy, welcome back to Focal Point American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Great to have you in the conversation. Got some more sound I want to give you, dealing on kind of a potpourri of issues here in this last segment before we go back to the phones. Let's see where I want to start on this. Let's go down to clip number 7. This is a former FBI Assistant Director, James Kallstrom, and this is significant because he's talking about the Mueller investigation as somebody who knows this agency inside and out. He used to be the Assistant Director of the FBI, and he's talking here with Tucker Carlson about what he believes are clearly the excesses of this Mueller investigation.
Tucker, I don't believe in kicking in doors unless there's a reason for it. And I don't believe for having outrageous search warrants, you know, unless there's a real bona fide reason. Is there a criminal predicate for this? I'd be surprised if there was. If it is, it's probably some concoction from some, you know, stupid intelligence contact. Or is it a national security predicate? I find that would be preposterous. You know, I just think these people are out of control. From the very time that Donald Trump was the nominee of the Republican Party, there has been a conspiracy, a fifth column, call it what you want, that has tried to stop him from getting elected, and number two, stop his effective work for the people of this country. And look at the magnificent job he's done in the economic front, in the foreign relations front, in a year and a half. In my view, more than the last 3 presidents combined.
Okay, so James Kallstrom says, look, I'd like to figure out what the predicate was even for granting a warrant in these cases. He's thinking here specifically of Paul Manafort, bust into the guy's house at 6 o'clock in the morning like you do for mob bosses. That's a mafia tactic, not a guy that is under investigation for bank fraud, which is what they wanted to try to nail Manafort for. And he says, look, since Donald Trump was nominated, since the time he won the nomination, not from the time he was elected, but from the moment he was nominated, there is a fifth column comprised of Obama holdovers. Well, weren't holdovers at the time, but Obama holdovers and the FBI and the DOJ that have been trying to kneecap Donald Trump, to try to stop his presidency, to invalidate it, to disqualify him, to shut it down, to get him impeached, to get him driven from office. You know, and it was these Obama holdovers that were going after Flynn. Remember, Flynn worked for Obama for a while, and then he quit. He resigned from the Obama administration and became a Donald Trump supporter. And that was something, that was a kind of a betrayal, I guess, in Barack Obama's eyes that he could not handle. He said, I want you guys taken out General Flynn, and apparently that's what they went out and tried to do. Now, I want to play this one clip, clip number 9. This is Donald Trump speaking at a business roundtable. And just to give some context for this, one of the things we need to realize is that coming up in September, another budget has to be crafted. September 28 is the deadline for that, and that budget is going to include something on immigration. Now, Donald Trump wants $25 billion, at last word, $25 billion to build his wall. So the question is that going to be in there or is it not going to be in there? Last time, the Republicans, all they gave him was $1.6 billion, and they prohibited him from using any of it to build a wall that has concrete in it. It's unbelievable. This is his own party doing it to him after he campaigned and won the election on border security and building a wall. This is unconscionable. People in his own party. So the question is, what are they going to do in September 28, by September 28? And here, clip 9 is what Donald Trump is telling us he is prepared to do if they do not give him the money he needs for the wall.
The Democrats are very weak on borders, very weak on, you look at the borders, they don't want the wall, but we're going to get the wall. Even if we have to think about closing up the country for a while, we're going to get the wall. We have no choice. We have absolutely no choice. And we're going to get tremendous security in our country.
So when Donald Trump says we're going to close up the country, I think what he means by that, we're going to shut down the government. I don't think he's talking about suspending immigration from anywhere. That's not what he's talking about here. I think he's talking about shutting down the government. If he doesn't get the money that he needs, he's going to veto this omnibus bill, whatever they send to him in September, if it doesn't provide adequate funding for border security. Remember, Donald Trump said the last time he signed that omnibus, I'm not going to sign another one of these again. And I think he's starting to get pretty frustrated at the obstructionism he's getting, not from the Democrats, but from his own party. It's his own party that's getting in the way of his agenda. It's Mitch McConnell with that stupid fake-a-buster that requires 60 votes instead of a majority to get something done. And I think Donald Trump is getting pretty frustrated. So he's determined, even if we have to shut down the government, we are going to get it done. Now, here's an interesting piece from Bill Whittle talking about Kanye West. Remember, Kanye West has been rattling a lot of cages here over the last week or so by coming out with his support for Donald Trump, saying not all blacks have to be Democrats, and it's just set off a lot of Sturm und Drang in the Democratic Party. But he says an interesting thing here in clip number 10. Listen to this.
You see, if Democrats don't get at least 85% of the black vote, they never win national office again. Let me just say that one more time. If black people decide that they don't have to be Democrats, then the Democratic Party simply ceases to exist. That's why enormous pressure was put on Chance the Rapper to recount his thought crime, which he did. Even more pressure was put on Kanye to take back his pro-Trump tweets, which, and I can't believe I'm saying this, to his everlasting credit, is something Kanye has steadfastly refused to do. And that includes, by the way, a death threat from a fellow musical hip-hop artist. Kanye says he likes the way that Candace Owen thinks. I do too. Kanye West listens to Jordan Peterson. And as I write this, I discover that he has quoted the smartest man on planet Earth, Thomas Sowell. Kanye West quoted Thomas Sowell. Kanye West has 28 million Twitter followers, 28 million people. Just heard from Thomas Sowell. And of the 28 million, I'm guessing that the number who've never heard of Thomas Sowell before is somewhere around 28 million. Now that means that Kanye has to renounce his conservative thought crimes. He just has to.
You know, you've already got some radio stations that have declared a blackout on Kanye West music. They're not going to play any Kanye West music in punishment for him leaving the reservation. And this is what Kanye West has done. He has left the Democratic plantation. He's pursuing his emancipation. He's dropping his shackles. He is fleeing for his freedom from the Democratic plantation, and that's something the left simply cannot allow. Now let's drop back, if we can, Jeff, to clip number 5. You know, one of the other issues that we have been tracking is this sexual scandal in the media and in the entertainment industry, Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey and the whole bit. And what we're finding out is that CBS News kept this Charlie Rose scandal on for under wraps for a lot longer than we thought. It's not only the Obama Department of Justice that tried to blind people to the truth. It was CBS News, been doing this since 1986. Now, this is John Yang on the PBS NewsHour. This isn't Fox News. This is PBS. They're so far to the left that if the earth was flat, they would have fallen off of it years ago. So anyway, here is PBS NewsHour, John Yang talking with Amy Britton of the Washington Post. Interesting, the Washington Post doing this expose of all the sexual escapades at CBS News. Let's listen.
When you say that your story says that this was more pervasive, more widespread, the complaints you found, how widespread are we talking?
Well, we have 27 new allegations against Charlie Rose, and they span 42 years. The oldest allegation is from 1976, and the most recent is from 2017.
And originally, CBS News had said that they knew nothing about this before your story in November. But you found instances where CBS managers had been told about this.
Right. So after our first story, we were kind of flooded with tips and voicemails and people reaching out saying that we had just kind of hit the tip of the iceberg with our first story, that this, in fact, had been going on at CBS and that people knew about it. Well, we found that the earliest instance of someone reporting this to a manager was in 1986 when Charlie was making lewd sexual remarks to a young news clerk.
And some of the women you talked to are preparing to file a lawsuit. What can you tell us about that?
That is correct. We expect that the lawsuit could be filed by the end of the week.
I mean, you even cite a manager who tried to talk someone out of taking a job with Rose at CBS.
Yes, that is correct. There was an instance that happened in the late 1990s when 60 Minutes 2 was starting. A woman came in and interviewed for a position to be Charlie Rose's assistant, and a CBS News executive pulled this woman aside and said, I want you to think long and hard before you take this job. Do you really want to be alone with this man?
All right, so bad trouble brewing at CBS. You know, these are the people that are all holier than thou on sexual escapades. This is the network that's just been death on wheels on Donald Trump for his affair with Stormy Daniels 12 years ago. Now it looks like they've got some skeletons in their own closet. One last soundbite before we take your phones. Let me sift through here until I find it. This is Sebastian Gorka clip, clip number 8. And, you know, the charge against Trump is collusion. And he says, well, Sebastian Gorka says, if you're looking for somebody to charge with collusion, I got a nominee for you.
I just want to know now, after this report came out about Kerry colluding, this is collusion, this is real collusion. I want to know, when are FBI agents with guns drawn going to raid his house on Nantucket, in Boston, in Georgetown? Because this is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. It still is. Iran is the largest state sponsor. And this man, without any official title, with no mandate, he's not in a transition team, he doesn't work for the U.S. government. He's meeting with the Iranian foreign minister to save this outrageously bad deal. I want to see the prosecution for this occur.
All right, so that's Seb Gorka. If anybody needs to be prosecuted for collusion, it is John Kerry, because he has been meeting secretly with Iranian leaders to try to prop up the disastrous Iran deal that he negotiated with Iran. It's a terrible, no good, very bad deal. It just needs to go the way of all flesh and just disappear beneath the waves. But he's been secretly trying to resurrect this thing, which is a violation of what's called the Logan Act. This is what the Democrats were hollering about. We got to get Flynn because he's violated the Logan Act by, as a private citizen, talking to foreign government. Well, he wasn't talking as a private citizen. He was Donald Trump's envoy. Back with your phone call. Stay with us.
Life, Love, and Family, featuring the American Association of Christian Counselors President, Dr. Tim Clinton. Each weekday evening, you'll hear Dr. Clinton and his expert guests address important and sometimes difficult issues of our day that impact your life, your love, and your family, using the scriptures as their text. Access to archive programs is available at lifeloveandfamily.net. Life, Love, and Family, 11 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
It's quite all right for them to be dressed in white, fine linen, clean, because though they're in the army, they don't have to do a blessed thing. All they have to do is watch, and when the Lord speaks, the war is over. I could be in on an army like that, right?
Join Dr. David Jeremiah for his series Escape the Coming Night, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
In the book of Isaiah, the word tells us, "The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever." In the same way, without careful planning, your financial goals could blow away like the seeds of a dandelion. It's never too early or too late to consider how a charitable gift annuity can help you meet the financial goals you've set for your loved ones, your causes, and yourself. Give AFA Foundation a call at 800-326-4543, extension 345, or visit our website, afafoundation.net. Let us explain how a charitable gift annuity can help you achieve your goals. As we read in Proverbs, the plans of the diligent lead to profit. Our phone number again is 800-326-4543, extension 345. And our website is afafoundation.net.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Focal Point. Brian Fisher.
Howdy, welcome back to Focal Point. Time for your phone calls. Number to call, 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. Hannah standing by to take your calls. Give her your name and the city you're calling from, and we'll put you right on. 888-589-8840. While you were calling in, I want to give you our Religion of Peace update for the day. These are instances of Islamic-inspired terrorism. One of my missions in life for this program is to convince you, to persuade you beyond any shadow of a doubt that Islam is not a religion of peace, but a religion of war, violence, and death. By the way, Facebook in trouble because of their suggested friends feature. They have probably done as much as anybody to facilitate connecting active jihadists around the world. They're facilitating jihadists in developing fresh terror networks and even recruiting new members to their cause using the suggested friends feature. That's something else that Facebook needs to answer for. Here's a story out of Texas. A Texas teen by the name of Maten Azizi Yaran planning a mass shooting at a mall. Doing it for ISIS. So here's an Islamic-inspired plot broken up by the FBI. He'd spent, what is the amount he'd spent here? $1,400 on weapons and tactical gear. Was going to carry it out at the Stonebriar Center Mall in Frisco, Texas. This is near Plano. We got a lot of listeners in that part of Texas. So he was making a plan to shoot the place up and was stopped just in time. And Kelly, I believe you've got an instance of another Religion of Peace update.
Yeah, so I believe it was last Thursday, a court in Pakistan just indicted 5 people in connection with one of Pakistan's most notorious cases of honor killing. It was the murder of a well-known model, blogger, and YouTuber. And one of those indicted is an imam at an Islamic mosque who was investigated for complicity, right after the young woman was strangled by her own younger brother to restore the family's lost honor. This was because she was an iconic figure of female open-mindedness and courage, but by the standards of Pakistan's worldview, she was too free, they say, and thus dishonor on her family, which is why this honor killing occurred. And Pakistan is known for they give pardons or suspended sentences for honor murders specifically. So Muslims commit 91% of honor killings worldwide, and this is something that it looks like getting off very easy for when it is well known, the facts of the case. So until this Islamic law stops giving honor killing such special pardons, it looks like more women will continue to suffer there.
So that's your Fisher factoid of the day. Actually, it's the Kelly factoid of the day. 91% of all honor killings around the world are committed by Muslims. You just got an example of one. She was killed, strangled, and killed for being too free, being too Western, enjoying too much liberty. A couple other items while you're calling in. 888-589-8840. Don't even know if I gave the number. My apologies if I did not. 888-589-8840 is the number. 888-589-8840. Here's a story from Central Africa. Muslims open fire at a Catholic church. They detonate grenades. 24 people are killed, including the bishop, and 170 injured by that expression of Islamic violence. In Australia, a Muslima, that's a Muslim woman, stabbed her host in Melbourne in the neck and the shoulders and the head while he was sleeping. No reason, no provocation. She's an accused terrorist, and she stabbed her victim a host of times while he was asleep. Acting on behalf of the Islamic Caliphate in the Netherlands, a Muslim screaming Allahu Akbar stabbed at least 3 people. Several people have been stabbed, according to a news report, by a man in the Dutch city of The Hague, local media reported. According to eyewitness posts in social media, the attacker shouted Allahu Akbar. So there's another knife attack in Europe. We just had Kelly talk about this honor killing in Pakistan. Here's the last. We could go on all afternoon on these religion and peace updates. But here's a man who said, I'm going to kill all of those who mocked me, my faith, Muhammad, my Savior, and Allah. Now, some people think it might be a fake since he uses the word Savior, which is not something that's typically used by Muslims. But the possibility is here he converted to Islam from Christianity, where they're used to thinking of their chief guy as the Savior. So this was at Lafayette College. This is Lafayette College where he's making these threats. All right, that's the Religion of Peace update for the day. Let's go to the phones. Let's begin with Buck in Columbus, Ohio. Buck, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, thanks. Just wanted to say, talk about something I haven't heard very much, and I'm not able to listen to you every day, but I listen most of the time. And one of the things I think needs to be said is that prior to President Trump being elected, we always heard continually, which was excellent, comments about we really need to make sure Christians get out and vote. And I haven't heard that now. We're coming up on an election here this year that can be very pivotal. And I was just hoping that maybe we could say a little bit more about doing that.
Yeah. All right, that's good.
Because I think it's important that we go to the polls.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that, Buck. In fact, I think you guys have a primary tomorrow, do you not?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Well, we want to make sure everybody in Columbus, Ohio turns out to vote. You can go to afaaction.net, afaaction.net. You can find out who AFA Action, which is you can find out who they endorsed in the governor's race. That's a very important race in Ohio. So go to afaaction.net, find out who they endorse for governor in Ohio. You can get a voter's guide that will enable you to make intelligent decisions about the congressional races that you're going to need to weigh in on. This is a primary, obviously, the general in November, but you can't let these primaries slip by you. Another big primary watching pretty closely is in West Virginia. So we'll talk about that more tomorrow. So anyway, Buck, with a good word, we got to crank up and get ready to get out and vote in November.
And can I add something to that?
Yes, you may.
Just a little piece of news. I actually just sent in my voter registration form over the weekend, so I'll make it in time for the Mississippi primaries. So I'll be encouraging all my friends who are just of age to start voting in these primaries.
All right, if I can get you to promise to vote for me, maybe you can be my first voter in my first run for office. Anyway, okay, let that be an encouragement. If you're voting age, 18 or over, get registered to vote and then use the franchise. Show up and vote. You know, the knock on evangelicals is when they win, they quit. When they lose, they quit. We got to be people that are persistent. We got to outlast the other side. Let's go to Ken in Woodward, Oklahoma. Ken, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yes, I was just listening to you here, and you know, this stuff with like James Comey and Robert Mueller and all that, that's been going on for a while. Comey investigated Bill Clinton, or he was part of the investigation of Bill Clinton, the Whitewater, all of that mess when Bill was governor of Arkansas. And you know, this isn't something new. It's something that's been going on, and it's been going on under our noses. You know, the mainstream media, if you want to talk about collusion, there's somebody I think that you should look at that be colluding to, you know, to deceive us, the regular American citizen, for years now. And it's just frustrating. It's frustrating for us, you know, as citizens who see the lawlessness and just the, you know, the outright refusal to abide by the nation's laws and the Constitution.
Yeah. All right, Ken, you're right about that. We got lifelong problems, decade-long problem with Mueller. We've talked about it before. He completely botched the anthrax investigation in 2001, put the wrong guy in prison. He kept 4 people in prison in Massachusetts in order to cover for Whitey Bulger, who was a mafia assassin. And 2 of the people that he kept in prison, he knew they were innocent, but he wanted to conceal the identity of his confidential informant, so he let these guys rot in prison. 2 of them died while they were behind bars. They were innocent, and Robert Mueller knew it. So he's not covered himself with glory. You know, James Comey completely botched the Hillary Clinton email investigation, whitewashed that. So Ken's exactly right. We've had a history with both of these people. Let's go to Joseph in Corinth, Mississippi. Welcome, Joseph. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
How you doing, brother Brian?
Doing good.
Man, you're doing some good work. I got something. Now, I'm African American. I'm going to say this, and it's going to probably resonate throughout the whole radio. Okay, the lady that called up and said that, you know, maybe you should run, maybe Abraham Hamilton should run, that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And you said something very important. You said, unless you're called. The key is when they elected Martin Luther King, they did it out of emotion. They didn't fast and pray, and they didn't try to find out if he was called, because 50 years later, it still ain't right. Because you have to be called to an office. And Abraham Hamilton has 5 children. So there's no, I mean, that would be like destroying his family for him, you know, unless the Lord calls him to it. No matter how good a person sounds on the radio or politically, you know, so they must be called by God in order for it to be successful.
Yeah. All right, Joseph, that's a great word. You know, Martin Luther was called to start the Reformation, no question about it, but he said, if I'd known what God was getting me into, I never would have done it. Couldn't have dragged me into it with a team of 20 horses. So you got to be called, and that's what sustains you when the going gets rough. All right, Joseph, good word about the impact on a family. Let's go to Al in Plano. Al, I got 20 seconds. Hit me with your best shot.
Well, I was driving around. I heard what you were saying the first hour about the FBI, the redactions, the DOJ.
Yes.
I think Sessions has to go. I mean, it's disgraceful what's going on there. They're hiding from the American people to protect themselves, Brian, and that's all I have to say. I think it needs to be revamped completely.
All right, I appreciate it, Al, and I'm reluctant to get there. I'm reluctant to say a bad word about Jeff Sessions. Admire the man so much, but maybe Al is right. It could be about time for him to go. That's it for today. Be back here tomorrow. God bless you. See you then.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.